In this video, I'm going to be talking about 8-7, which is called patterns, extending tables. So basically, we're taking tables like we had yesterday, and tables are a way for mathematicians and scientists and different people to organize data. So we're taking data that's in these tables, numbers, and we're going to find the relationships between different rules. So yesterday we were finding rules, today we're finding relationships. So I'm going to talk on the next slide about what that means. Okay, so yesterday we had a variable like a up top, and then down below we would have a rule like a minus 5. Okay, we were trying to find the rule, okay, like a minus 5. But today we already know the rule. We actually know two different rules, and we're trying to find the relationship between the two rules, okay? So in the top line is one rule, and down here is another rule. And the rules are described up here. So rule A was to start with 1 and then add 2 each time you went to the right. So I started with 1, I added 2 and got 3, added 2, got 5, and then 5 plus 2 is 7. Rule B says to start with 5 and add 2. So 5 plus 2 is 7, 7 plus 2 is 9, and 9 plus 2 is 11. So now that I have the rules, the question will ask you, what is the relationship between the two rules? So now I need to do kind of what we did yesterday. I need to look within columns and find the relationship between the two rules. Now I'm not going to tell you if it's a plus or minus type relationship or a times or divide type relationship. That's what you need to figure out on your own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this first term, which a term is just a set of data. So this first set of data, rule A had 1 and rule B had 5. A couple things I notice. 1 times 5 is 5, so maybe the relationship between the rules has something to do with multiplying by 5. I also know that 1 plus 4 is 5. Now I'm going to look at the second term over here to decide which of those would be correct. Well, 3 times 5 is 15, so that doesn't work. However, 3 plus 4 is 7, so it's looking like that might be my rule, but I need to make sure that's, or my relationship, not rule, but I need to make sure that works for all of the terms. So 5 plus 4 is 9, and 7 plus 4 is 11. So my relationship has something to do with plus 4. Now I can't just write rule A plus 4, okay, because I want a relationship. Like if I said, what is the relationship between the sun and the temperature outside? I would say, well, when the sun is out, the temperature is generally higher, okay? So I'm looking for a relationship, how the two things are connected. So in math, for this problem, I might say something like rule B is 4 more than rule A. I could also say the opposite of that and also be correct. I could say rule B, or I'm sorry, I could say rule A is 4 less than rule B. So because it was a adding and subtracting type relationship, it was adding, I can use words like more than or less than. And usually more than means plus and less than means subtract. So why could I use both of those and still be correct? Well, the first one is talking about, let me erase this here really quickly. The first sentence that I had up there where it says rule B is 4 more than rule A. Well, that is talking about from rule B to rule A. As I go from bottom to top, it does get smaller. And the second one, rule A is 4 less than rule B, is talking about rule A, then rule B. As I go from rule A to rule B, it does get bigger. So that's okay. In relationships, you can do it either way. You can do it backwards, and that would be just fine. Rules, you have to be really specific. If I changed that in a rule to subtract, that would change everything. But in relationships, it doesn't quite matter. Let's look at another example. Okay, so here, I need to fill in the chart and find the relationship. So, I'm going to move this up here a little bit. what I'm going to do is I'm going to start filling in the chart. So whatever it says start with, that's what goes here where it says first term. So it says start with 0. So I'm starting with 0. And for rule E, which is the top row, it says to add 2 each time. So 0 plus 2 is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 2 is 6. So I'm done with rule E. Let's look at rule F. Rule F says start with 0, okay, and add 8 each time. So 0 plus 8 is 8. 8 plus 8 is 16. And 16 plus 8 is 24. So I'm done with filling in the chart. Now let's find the relationship between rule E and rule F. Now, I notice a couple different things. This term isn't going to really help me because it's 0 and 0. So let's look at these two, and these two, okay? When I'm looking here, I have 2 and 8. Again, I could do 2 times 4 is 8, or maybe it's 2 plus 6, right? Because 2 plus 6 is 8. So either of those might work. So now I need to look at my third and fourth terms to determine what the relationship really is. When I try 4 times 4, I do get 16. If I try 4 plus 6, I get 10. So I don't think plus 6 is working. Let's see if times 4 is correct, though. 6 times 4 is 24. So it looks like my relationship between the two has something to do with multiplying by 4. So now I need to go back and think, well, which one is bigger? With rules, there's one way to write it, right? Yeah, I have to put add in this rule, otherwise it'll be wrong. But with relationships between two rules, there's 2 ways to write it. So I could either say, well, let's go back and look. Rule F is the bigger one. So I could say rule F is 4 times bigger than rule E. I could also write the opposite, right? Rule E is the smaller one. It's 4 times smaller than whatever rule F is. So I could write rule E is 4 times smaller than rule F. And either would be correct. My advice to you when you're trying to write a rule, or I'm sorry, a relationship between the rules, is you always have to make sure you have the name of each rule in it. You can't just say it's 4 times bigger, because I'm not going to know, well, what is it? What are you talking about? So you always have to have the name of both in there, okay? And if you're kind of confused, I would just always start with the top rule. So I would start with rule E and then decide, what do I know about rule F from there? I know that as I go down, you're multiplying by 4. So that means like 2 is 4 times smaller than 8. And 4 is 4 times smaller than 16. So look at 1 or 2 examples to help you write the rule. So my top number was 4 times smaller than my bottom number. Well, the top is rule E, and it's 4 times smaller than my bottom, rule F. So those are some tips to help you write your rules. Let's look at another example. This is an example of how you might see a word problem in a problem that involves writing the relationship between rules. So it says that Anna's growing tomatoes and lettuce. Find the number of each type of plant in row 4. So they want me to figure out what goes down here at the end. And then it says, what is the relationship between the number of lettuce plants and the number of tomato plants in each row? Okay, let's take it step by step. First, let's find what goes in this 4th row here, okay? So remember, always start with the beginning. To get from 2 to 4, I could either multiply by 2 or add 2. So let's keep going with the second and third term to see what would be correct, multiplying or adding 2. 4 plus 2 is 6, so that doesn't work, but 4 times 2 is 8, and 6 times 2 is 12. So it looks like times 2 is what is working out here. So my rule has something to do with multiplying by 2. Let's say that we need to fill in that last row there. I notice that as I go from left to right, I'm adding 2, 2, 4, 6. So in a pattern, the next thing that would go here is 8. So they didn't give me that next term, but I'm using the pattern as I go from left to right in the tomato plants row to figure out what would go there under the 4th term. So that one's kind of tricky. You have to figure out what goes here, and then I need to figure out what goes below it with lettuce plants. So I know that as I go from top to bottom, I'm multiplying by 2. So 8 times 2 is 16. So now that I've filled in that last term, I can figure out the relationship between the number of lettuce plants and the number of tomato plants. Remember, in the last example, we had to use rule, rule A and rule B. Well, here we need to use, it says, what's the relationship between? We need to use the number of lettuce plants, because it says it there, and the number of tomato plants. So I'm going to pick one to start with. I'm just going to start with lettuce because it's first in the question. So the number of lettuce plants is, okay, now I need to look at my table and figure out what is my relationship. Here's lettuce plants down here in the second row, okay? So my lettuce plants, it looks like I have 4 and then 2. So this top row is 2 times smaller. My bottom row here, I have 8 and 4. Again, it's 2 times smaller. So the number of lettuce plants is always, remember, a relationship should always happen. So that word always is really important. The number of lettuce plants is always 2 times more, because lettuce's row is always bigger than the number of tomato plants. This would be a perfect answer. Now remember, with relationships, I could always write it backwards. I don't have enough room to write this, but I could also write the number of tomato plants, which is up top here, is always 2 times less than the number of lettuce plants. So whatever your relationship is, here it was times 2. You should use that somewhere in it. I said 2 times, okay? And you should always use the 2 categories that you're working with. So here, that would be my relationship. I hope that this is starting to make sense to you. What I want you to do is fill in this chart. So on a piece of paper, you will need to write this chart down, and you're filling in the chart. So it tells you what you're supposed to do for row H. So in the top row, you need to start with 0. So your first term is 0, and I want you to tell me what the second, third, and fourth terms are, and you can do that because you're adding 2. Row I, you're starting with 10, and you're adding 2 each time. So I want you to tell me what the second, third, and fourth terms are there. Then, after you fill in the chart, you need to tell me what is the relationship between the 2 rows. So remember, a relationship uses the name of each row, row H and row I, and it tells me how one compares to the other. So maybe it is row H is always 4 times bigger than row I. Or maybe it's an adding and subtracting type relationship where row I is always 2 more than row H. Something like that. I'm looking for something along those lines. If you're confused what a relationship should sound like, go back and look at the previous slides to get some help on it. So just like yesterday, we're kind of trying to figure out how 2 different numbers are related to each other. So look at the numbers in the second term, third term, fourth term to see how these numbers and these rules are related. Good luck! And don't forget to bring this with you tomorrow for credit.